I was never supposed to be there. That's the part nobody talks about when they tell the story now. They talk about the gold armor, about the Zeke blaster, about what the Victory Robo's sword looked like when we drove it through Golomayas at the end. They don't talk about the hour before that, when I was sitting in the cab of a municipal emergency vehicle commandeered from a fire station 3 blocks from the combat zone, listening to the team's radio frequency because I'd memorized it 6 months ago, and nobody had bothered to change the encryption key. They don't talk about the fact that I was there, because I'd followed the response column out of the city's emergency coordination center without being authorized, wearing a borrowed reflective vest that said, "Rescue" on the back in letters, large enough to make people assume I had a right to be wherever I was standing. My name is Kyoko Hayase. I was a shuttle pilot. I am a shuttle pilot. That's what I tell people when they ask what I do for a living, because what I did on that particular afternoon doesn't have a clean title yet. Some things don't. I'd been watching the Tatsumi siblings work for months by that point. Officially, I was a civilian asset who'd rendered assistance during the Tornadius incident. The tornado that had nearly swallowed my orbital shuttle on re-entry. The same tornado the 5 of them had dismantled from the inside out while I was still fighting the controls at 40,000 feet. That was how I first heard Xiao's voice through the comm system. That was how I knew who they were. When the shuttle touched down safely, and I went looking for whoever had been on that frequency, I found the Go-Go 5, and I found that their father had designed the team for exactly 5 people and had no intention of adding a 6th. I'd spent months trying to make myself useful anyway, running data when they needed it, staying on the radio, showing up near the perimeter of incidents in borrowed vests and requisitioned vehicles, close enough to help if something went wrong on the margins. Far enough back that Matoi couldn't point at me and tell me to go home with any real authority. He'd tried. Shu always talked him down. I think Shu felt guilty. He was the one known before all of this started. Back when we were both Academy people with ambitions that didn't involve fighting demonological invasion forces in the streets of Tokyo. The morning it happened, I was at the coordination center running a secondary monitoring shift that nobody had officially assigned to me. I'd been doing that for 3 weeks. Showing up early, taking a terminal at the back of the room, being present enough that people forgot to question it. The first alerts came in around 10 in the morning. Seismic anomalies in the Eastern Ward. Then, a fire signature that didn't match any industrial profile in the city's database. Then the Sima clan's distortion signature across 3 separate electromagnetic bands at once, which was unusual. Usually they picked a neighborhood and hit it. 3 simultaneous signatures meant either a coordinated attack or something larger operating underneath that was drawing them in. I was on the radio to the team's frequency inside 90 seconds. Matoi was already moving. "Point contact," he said to his siblings. "Pattern's wrong. This isn't Stan Sima." "I'm reading a 4th signature," said Nagar. "He's Go Blue, the 2nd oldest, the analytical one. It's not Sima. Whatever it is, it's bigger." I didn't say anything on the channel. I never broke radio silence when they were working. I just listened and moved. I had the emergency vehicle's engine running before the coordination center order had even issued its formal response order. I pulled out of the lot heading east, following the plume of smoke I could see against the morning sky. What I found when I got there was a city block that had been redesigned by violence. The Sima clan's ground troops, the uniforms they used for street-level work, were scattered across 4 intersections. But they weren't in formation. They were peripheral. They were watching something. That should have told me everything. But it took me another 30 seconds of looking to understand what they were watching. In the center of the intersection, planted in the broken asphalt, like something that had fallen from a great height and simply stopped, stood a figure in gold. He was not particularly tall. That was the first thing that surprised me. I'd been in the vicinity of enough Sima-form creatures by that point that I'd calibrated my threat assessment to scale with size. And this figure was roughly human-proportioned. But there was nothing human in the way he moved. He pivoted to face an incoming imp cluster, and the movement was too economical, too precise. Every degree of rotation accounted for. No wasted motion anywhere. The gold armor he wore caught the morning light, and scattered it. The helmet was full face, no visible eyes, and he held a sidearm that was built from what looked like a shortened shotgun frame, heavily modified, which I would later learn was called the Zeke Blaster. He fired twice. 4 imps ceased to exist. The Sima troops scattered back to their perimeter positions. And then, from the northern end of the block, the thing that had been creating the 4th signature came through a wall. I had read enough of the team's field reports by then to have a working taxonomy for alien threat types. I knew the Sima clan's architecture, the Dark Kings, the baronial forms, the spell users, the infantry. I knew their scale. I was not prepared for Golemos. He came through the wall of what had been a 5-story office building the way a person walks through a curtain of hanging beads. The building's structural resistance, registering as a minor inconvenience, the debris falling around him without touching him, as though even the rubble understood to get out of the way. He was massive in a way that communicated itself before scale. His body was encased in armored plates that seemed grown rather than manufactured. Organic ridges overlapping each other, the way the scales of some deep ocean creature might, except that these plates were the color of dried blood and older dirt, and they moved with him like a second skeleton that had been added after the original. His head sat low on his shoulders, and his eyes, when they caught the light, registered nothing. Not aggression, not hunger, just the absence of any concern for what was in front of him. This was Golemos Juuma King, last action of the Juuma demon clan before they'd gone quiet for a generation. The gold figure, Zeke, did not run. He turned to face Golemos and raised the blaster and fired, and the shot connected. And Golemos didn't even slow down. Had my vehicle in reverse before the first shockwave hit, pulled back 2 blocks, and put a corner between me and the impact zone. I could hear it more than see it after that. The ground register concussions that meant something was hitting the street, hard enough that the pavement was transmitting it. The secondary sounds that were structural failures happening in sequence as the fight moved through the block. Team's radio was alive. "Go Blue, I need your reading on that 4th contact," Matoy said. His voice was controlled, which meant he was working. "Juuma classification," Nagare said, "not Sima. Different taxonomy entirely. Sci-Fi signatures are subsidiary. They're not leading this, they're supporting it." "Supporting what?" A pause. Then, "Something been hunting the Sima too. Hunting things the Sima want." I was out of the vehicle and moving on foot before I'd consciously decided to. I went around the block the long way, keeping buildings between me and the fight, using the smoke and the debris dust as visual cover. I needed a sight line that wasn't directly in the line of fire. Shh. I found one on the 2nd floor of an evacuated convenience store through a window facing the intersection. What I saw was Zeke on one knee, blaster still up, with Golomoi standing 10 meters away looking at him the way a person looks at a problem they've already solved but are taking a moment to appreciate. The Sema troops had reformed behind Golemos. Not around him, behind him. They were watching, which told me the alliance was real and Golomois was running it. Zeke fired again. The shot took Golomoi in the chest plate, and the plate cracked and healed, and Golomoi stepped forward once, closing the gap to 8 meters. And then the Go-Go 5 arrived. They came in formation, which is the only way they came when they had time to coordinate. Matoy first. Go Red. With the kind of forward momentum that meant he'd been running before he'd finished thinking about it, which is what Matoy did. The other 4 behind him and spreading, filling the intersection's approach angles. They were suited. It's on. The 5-color formation that I'd seen dismantle things twice Golomois's size. Golomois looked at them, and then he looked back at Zeke. It was the look of someone recalculating a very simple equation and arriving at the same answer. The fight that followed lasted 4 minutes. I counted. Because when things are happening that fast and that violently, counting is the only discipline available to the parts of your mind that can't do anything useful. Toy went directly at Golomois and bounced off. That's not a figure of speech. The physical impact of engaging Golomois at close range threw him back 15 feet. Nagar tried a different angle and did marginally better, getting 2 clean hits in before Golomois's return strike folded him into a parked vehicle that no longer looked much like a vehicle afterward. Shu, Daimon, and Matsuri worked the flanks and did the thing they were trained to do. which was coordinate fire and draw attention, and Golomos gave them a fraction of his attention, which was exactly the wrong fraction to receive. Zeke, in the meantime, was back on his feet. He moved differently now, not the same mechanical precision from before. Something in him had shifted. He was fighting with the weight of a person who has been in this exact position before and knows how it ends. I'd read enough, after action psych reports in my years of orbital support work, to recognize the body language of a soldier who has run the scenario and found only one outcome. He wasn't being careless. He was being deliberate about the things that mattered. He was getting Golomois's attention off the 5 siblings. He did it by being the most dangerous thing in the intersection, which required him to walk directly toward Golomois while firing, which is not a sustainable tactical position, but is a very effective one for the 30 seconds before it stops working. It stopped working at 31 seconds. Golomois hit Zeke with something that wasn't a punch or a blast, so much as a weight of force. The kind of strike that comes from a creature so much larger and so much older that the physics of its violence don't map cleanly onto what smaller bodies expect. Zeke went down. He did not get back up the same way he had before. I was out the window before I could talk myself out of it. Second floor wasn't a long drop. I rolled when I landed and came up moving and covered the distance to Zeke's position in what I would estimate, generously, was the least dignified sprint of my adult life. The team was occupied. Golomos had turned back toward them. The Sci-Fi troops had repositioned. There was a gap of approximately 8 seconds, where nobody was looking at the gold-armored figure lying in the street. And I used those 8 seconds. I skidded to a stop next to him and got my hands under his shoulders and found that the armor was hot. Not painfully so, but warm in the way that living things are warm, which was the first indication that I was dealing with something very different from the Sci-Fi's manufactured constructs. He moved. He turned his helmet toward me. "You're not one of them," he said. His voice carried the slight flattening of transit speech. Whatever technology was doing his language processing was competent but not perfect. The way a skilled interpreter who learned your language as an adult is competent but not perfect. "No," I said. "I'm with them. Sort of." "Sort of," he repeated, and there was something in it that wasn't quite amusement. "My name is Kyoko, pilot. I follow them. I help when I can." I was checking his armor for damage as I said it, moving on autopilot while the part of my brain that handled social calibration stumbled over how to explain my relationship to the Go-Go 5 to a dying alien. "What's your name?" "Zeke." He paused. "Juuma Hunter Zeke, though there is no Juuma Hunter Corps anymore." Golomois made certain of that. I'd heard the phrase "last of his kind" before, in stories, in history. I'd never heard it said the way he said it. Not with grief, not with drama, but with the flat specificity of a fact that had been true for long enough that the emotion around it had been worn away, leaving only the shape. "He killed them all?" I asked. "There were 4 of us remaining after the last major engagement," Zeke said. "Lilia, Garn, Doss, and me. Golomois destroyed the other 3 before any of us could react to how fast he moved. I have been chasing him across 3-star systems since then. I arrived here because this is where he was going. Dark Sword." "What's the Dark Sword?" "A weapon old enough that neither the Juuma nor the Sci-Fi made it. Both clans want it. Golomois believes he can find it here, on this planet. Shh. If he absorbs its power, nothing your team has will be sufficient." From across the intersection came the sound of Matoi's voice raised in the kind of controlled shout that meant he was pushing through something that was pushing back. I looked over my shoulder. The team was still up, still in the fight, but Golomois was managing them, keeping them occupied without being fully engaged. The way a large animal manages smaller ones, not to destroy them yet, but to control the space. "Said Lilia," I said. I don't know why I said it. Something in the way he'd listed the names. Zeke was quiet for a moment. "Yes, who was she?" Another pause, longer. "My superior." There is a word in your language. "Commanding officer." "That is accurate, but incomplete." He turned his helmet toward me again. "You look like her. The structure of your face. The way you came across the street." I didn't know what to say to that. "She ran toward things too," he said. "It was why I followed her. It is why they all followed her. 'Cause she never stopped moving forward, even when forward was the wrong direction by any reasonable measurement." I understood then that I was hearing a man, a soldier, Tell me who he was by telling me who he'd lost. I understood also that I was holding this conversations while crouched in a street where an alien exterminator was fighting a rescue team 60 meters away, and that the part of this situation I had the most ability to affect was the 60 meters, not the conversation. Tell me about the Zeke crystal, I said. The thing that gives you the armor. He was quiet for a beat that felt like reassessment. You know about it. I know it exists. Know what it does exactly or how. It holds the power of the Juuma hunter lineage, he said. Every hunter who came before, every technique, every defeat of every Juuma we ever destroyed, it holds all of that. Still bonds to a host, and the host channels it. A Juuma hunter can fight at a level that organic biology alone cannot reach. Can it bond to a human? He did not answer immediately. The kind of pause that isn't confusion, but deliberation. Lilia was not what most people in this galaxy would consider a standard biology, he said. She was. Her species had certain qualities, the crystal calibrated to her. I have not considered whether it would calibrate to. I'm asking because you're hurt and Golomois is still standing and my team is losing ground, I said. I'm not asking because I want the armor for myself. I'm asking because the math is wrong, and I want to know if there's a way to fix it. He was quiet for 3 seconds. Then you are very like her. Is that a yes? I don't know, he said. I have never attempted the transfer with a human. It may not take. Crystal may recognize an incompatible biology and reject. He paused. It may not. Golomois is moving toward the team's left flank, I said, watching. Matoy's going to try to compensate and leave the center open. I've watched him fight for 6 months. He always protects his siblings before he protects the tactical line. In about 10 seconds, Golomois is going to hit the center. Zeke's helmet came around. He watched. 10 seconds later, Golomois hit the center exactly as I'd said he would. How did you know that? He asked. Because. I've been watching from the outside for 6 months, I said. That's the only useful thing about not being allowed in. You see more. Another pause. Then Zeke brought his right hand up and opened it, and in his palm was the crystal. It was smaller than I'd expected, roughly the size of a large marble, deep gold in color, throwing light in directions that didn't quite match the angle of the sun above us. Pulsed once slowly, like a heartbeat at rest. You understand, he said, that if the transfer succeeds, it will be for as long as this fight requires. Crystal will not stay with you indefinitely. I built this armor from a lineage. It is not yours to keep. I don't want to keep it, I said. I want to finish the fight. He looked at me for a long moment. Tell the team, he said, that Golomois's armor plate will fracture at the anterior joint if struck with sufficient concentrated force. Keeps that joint elevated in combat. You will need to drive him down. Okay, tell them they have held the line well. That what they are doing, the rescue, the protection, it is what my people believed the purpose of strength was. It is why Lilia would have liked them. I wasn't going to be able to carry all of that cleanly across tactical radio in the middle of a fight. But I memorized it anyway. Tell me your name, he said. Your full name. Kyoko Hayashi. He said it back once in his own pronunciation. Then he closed my fingers around the crystal. It is difficult to describe what happened next in terms that map onto ordinary experience. Closest I can come is this. Imagine that you are in a room and someone turns on the lights. Not a lamp. Not a fixture. All of the lights everywhere simultaneously. And you discover that the room is much larger than you believed it was. And it contains things you didn't know were there. Symptoms are the residue of every fight anyone has ever fought in that room. Not the violence of it, but the intention. The will that made the fights happen. The refusal to stop. That is the closest I can get. When I opened my eyes, I was standing, and I was wearing gold. The first thing I noticed was the weight. Not heaviness, but mass that had become part of me, rather than something sitting on me. The second thing I noticed was the silence. The armor processed the acoustic environment and filtered it, and the result was a kind of tactical clarity I had never experienced. I could hear Matoy's breathing across the intersection, hear Nagare calling an adjustment, hear Golomois's footsteps as distinct impacts in the pavement. I looked down. Zeke was on the ground. The crystal was gone from his hand. Go, he said. His voice was very quiet now. I went. The Sima troops were the first things between me and the center of the intersection. I had never fought in my life with anything more than the basic defensive training that orbital program candidates received, which was minimal and theoretical. And for about half a second, I was acutely aware of that fact. And then the crystal's lineage did what it was built to do, and my body started making decisions faster than my conscious mind could track them. I cleared 3 imps before I'd registered moving. The Zeke blaster was in my hand. I hadn't drawn it consciously, and it was fitted for a hand slightly larger than mine, but the armor adjusted the grip and the trigger pull, and it fired clean. 2 more imps fell. I was through the outer ring of Sima forces and into the open space of the intersection before any of them had recalibrated to the new variable. Toy saw me. There was a moment. I watched it happen through the armor's optics, where he processed what he was seeing, ran it against every category of threat he knew, didn't find a match, and landed on a controlled combat pause. His siblings had similar moments, briefer, because they were keying off his reaction. "That's Kyoko's voice," Shu said over the channel. He'd caught some biometric that the armor was transmitting. "It is," I said. "What are you wearing?" Later, I said. "Golemos has a weak point. Anterior joint of the chest plate. We need to drive him down to expose it. That means sustained pressure from above his center of mass, something that forces him to brace downward." Matoi said nothing for exactly 2 seconds, which is a long time in a tactical situation for Matoi. Then Nagar, "Did you catch that?" "Caught it," Nagar said. "Go Blue acknowledges. We need the Grand Liner." "Calling it in," Matoi said. The Grand Liner was the team's heavy response asset. A 5-train emergency formation that could assemble into a combat mech of considerable weight. Getting it to the urban intersection required a coordination that they'd been building since the first alert, which meant it was already en route. Ni's acknowledgement was the instruction to accelerate the deployment. While that was happening, we needed to keep Golemos from moving. What followed was the period of the fight that I remember in the clearest detail, which is strange, because it was also the most violent. Clarity usually degenerates in high-stress situations. Or I think the crystal's processing was augmenting my cognition along with my physical capability, because I remember it all in sequence. I remember Golemos turning to face me, and the particular quality of his attention shifting. The difference between the way he'd looked at the team, useful obstacles, and the way he looked at me. A hunter armor, a lineage he'd specifically worked to eliminate, arriving in front of him on a planet he'd thought was clear of such threats. I remember the sound his voice made when he spoke, which the armor translated as something between contempt and recalibration. "Human," he said, wearing Zeke's armor. "Zeke's lineage is dead. The last part of it is standing in front of you," I said. He moved. "Will not pretend I handled it with skill." Crystal carried me through the first exchange, my body moving through blocks and deflections that I had no conscious training for. The accumulated muscle memory of every Juuma hunter who had ever survived a fight with a Juuma King, flowing through the armor's systems and into mine. Golemos was very fast for his size, and after the first 3 exchanges he had recalibrated to my patterns, which meant the lineage's automatic responses were no longer sufficient, and what was left was me. What I had was 6 months of watching. I had watched Matoi fight Golemos for 4 minutes before the transfer. I had watched Golemos fight Zeke for 31 seconds before Zeke went down. I had watched Golemo manage the team's formation from across an intersection, with the Zeke armor's enhanced optics giving me detail I hadn't had from the convenience store window. I knew where he put his weight when he wound up for a big strike. I knew that he always watched the opponent's leading hand. I knew that he moved his left shoulder forward slightly before he fired a kinetic blast. I wasn't a hunter. I wasn't a soldier, but I had been watching for 6 months, and watching, it turns out, is a kind of learning. I went left when his left shoulder came forward, and the blast went right of me by 18 inches. I went under his responding grab and hit the anterior joint of the chest plate 3 times in succession with the blaster's grip. Blunt force, not discharge. Because the crystal had told me what Zeke had told me about that joint, and I trusted it. The 3rd impact cracked something. Golemos made a sound. He grabbed me, and the grip locked around the armor, and the armor held it, bent under it, and I fired the blaster point blank into the joint crack, and that time it discharged. and Golomois threw me across the intersection. I landed hard. The armor absorbed most of it. I was on my feet inside 4 seconds, which surprised me. "We're in position," Matoy said over the channel. The Grand Liner's formation rumble was audible through the ground. "It's the timing on that joint." "Now," I said. "Hit him now from above if you can. He'll brace down and the plate will fold." "Understood, Kyoko." I got clear. The Grand Liner was already in formation, and what happened next belongs to the team's story more than mine. The combined weight and force of the mech they'd built from 5 emergency response trains driving down onto Golomoa while he was already off balance from the joint damage. The armor plate cracking the rest of the way open. The Victory Robo's sword finding the gap. I watched it from 40 meters back, and I understood in that moment something that the team probably already knew, and I'd never quite believed from the outside. The team wasn't 5 people. It was a thing those 5 people built together. And it was bigger than any of them individually. And it was the kind of thing you only build when you're all pointing in exactly the same direction for long enough. I'd been watching it from outside for 6 months, and I'd seen it as a capability, a tactical asset, a thing I wanted to be part of because it was impressive. I understood in that moment that it was actually a relationship that 5 siblings had been building since before the Sci-Fi clan arrived. The fight was an expression of something that went deeper than the fight. Golomois fell. He fell the way large things fall, with a sound that carries through the ground before it carries through the air, with a secondary impact when the mass settled, with a moment where the surrounding environment seemed to recalibrate to the absence of the pressure he'd been generating. The Sci-Fi troops, without their contractor, scattered. The distortion signatures dropped off one by one. The intersection was quiet. I was aware in the quiet that the crystal's warmth had changed. It was still warm, but differently. The way something is warm when it has spent its energy rather than held it in reserve. I looked at my hands, through the armor's gauntlets, and the gold was still there, but I could see through it fractionally, which hadn't been true before. Zeke had told me it would only last as long as the fight required. I walked back to where he was lying. The team was pulling out of the mech formation behind me. I could hear them coming, but I moved faster. He was still alive. Barely. The word barely is doing a great deal of work in that sentence. He had the quality of someone who has decided to stay alive for a specific reason, and is now assessing whether that reason still applies. Knelt next to him. "We got him," I said. "I heard," he said. His voice was thinner now, the joint. "You remembered. I remembered. And the team. They were already winning. I just gave them the angle." He made a sound that might have been disagreement, or might have been a laugh that was using borrowed equipment. "You are a poor judge of what you contributed, Kyoko Hayase." The gold was fading from the armor now, pulling back incrementally the way light fades at dusk. Not all at once, but in a direction. Could feel the crystal withdrawing, drawing back toward whatever it would become, without a host to bond to. Lilia would have done the same thing, he said. Exactly the same thing. Different technique. Same decision. The running toward it part. Yes. I didn't know what to say to a man whose entire civilization was dead. I had spent the morning trying to be useful to 5 people who hadn't asked for my help. And now I was sitting next to someone who had carried the weight of a dead lineage across 3-star systems, because there was no one else left to carry it. And he was using his last energy to tell me that. I reminded him of someone he'd lost. "What happens now?" I asked. "To you?" "I don't know," he said. "I have not thought much past this point. Golomois was the last thing on the list." He paused. "There is a freedom in that I did not expect." "The dark sword," I said. "The thing he was looking for. Buried. The location is in the crystal's record. It should stay buried. I would recommend you tell someone who makes decisions about such things." "I'll tell Nagar. He's good with that kind of information." "The analytical one." "Yes." I watched him work. The armor was almost fully gone now. I was back in my borrowed reflective vest, which felt profoundly inadequate given the morning I'd had. Crystal sat in my open palm between us. Visible now. Solid. Its glow reduced to something quiet. Mati arrived first. He stopped 3 steps away and looked at me the way he sometimes looked at tactical situations that didn't have a clean category. Processing. Assessing. Arriving at a preliminary judgment before committing to a response. "Go," said. "Go, Red," I said. Wearing a rescue vest from Station 7. I am. You're not authorized to be here. I'm aware of that. A pause. Shu arrived beside him and gave me the look I knew from before all of this. The look that said he understood what I'd done and was already working on how to explain it to his brother. Matsuri came around my right side and knelt next to Zeke without being asked, pulling a medical kit that was part of her rescue loadout. Assessing with the quiet efficiency of someone who had done emergency triage in situations considerably more chaotic than this one. He needs more than I have, she said quietly, but he's stable. There is a facility, Zeke said. The city's lower district. My ship is there. It has medical capability. Matoy looked at him for a long moment. The calculation that happened behind Matoy's eyes, when he was deciding something, was not invisible if you'd been watching him long enough. I had. We'll get you there, Matoy said. Said it. The way the Tatsumi siblings said things when they'd decided. Not as a question, not as a provisional, but as a simple statement of what was going to happen. It was the register they used when they were working. He looked at me again. Later, he said, which was the same word I'd used. And I understood that the conversation we needed to have was acknowledged and deferred, and would happen when there was time for it to happen properly. Later, I agreed. We got Zeke to his ship. The medical systems did what they could, which was more than Matsuri's field kit, though Zeke's condition remained what it was. The injury from Volomoya's final strike had done something that the technology could manage, but not reverse. And we all understood that recovery was a process measured in months, not hours. He was alive. That was the operative fact. Naguère stayed with the ship's computer longer than anyone else, going through the crystal's recorded coordinates for the Dark Sword's burial site, with the kind of focused attention he brought to data problems. He came out 3 hours later, with a hard copy printout, and a look that meant he'd already built a containment protocol in his head. It needs to stay where it is, he said. I've logged the location in our system with a restricted access flag. If the Saima move toward it, we'll know. What is it exactly, I asked. Something very old, he said. Made by something that isn't here anymore. He paused. The Juuma Hunter records describe it as a weapon built to end a war that ended some other way first. It's been buried for longer than the Saima clan has existed. So, it's not dangerous if it stays buried. Most things aren't, Naguère said, which was his way of saying the conversation was complete. I sat with Zeke for part of the evening, while the team handled the city-side recovery work that followed any Saima incident. The structural assessments, the coordination with municipal services, the after-action documentation that their father required. Zeke was awake intermittently. We talked when he was. He told me about Lilia, about the last major campaign before Golomois had turned it, about what the Juuma Hunter lineage was built on. Not conquest, not territory, but the specific, unglamorous work of tracking things that destroyed inhabited worlds and stopping them before they arrived. He told it in the flat, detailed way of someone reporting rather than narrating, and I understood that this was how he'd processed it, by turning it into information rather than grief. Because information could be handled, and grief at that scale was not. She used to say that the worst part of the work was the distance, he said at one point. From the things you were protecting, you never got to see them. You only knew that the Juuma hadn't arrived, which meant they were still there, living whatever they lived. She said it was like being a wall. A wall doesn't know what's on the other side. It just holds. That sounds lonely, I said. She said it was, he said. She also said she wouldn't trade it. I thought about 6 months of borrowed reflective vests and unauthorized radio access and proximity that was never quite inside the line. About watching from outside and knowing that the knowing itself was a kind of contribution, even when no one was asking for it. I understand that, I said. He looked at me. Yes, he said. I thought you might. The Gogo 5's father, Mondo Tatsumi, the architect of the whole program, the man who had built the rescue system and the combat protocols and the 5 roles for his 5 children and had explicitly told me there was no 6th slot, came to the ship late that evening. He walked in without announcement, which was his way, and stood at the foot of Zeke's recovery station and looked at him with the expression of a man who is revising a position. He looked at me second. Naguère briefed me, he said. Okay, I said. The anterior joint, he said. Zeke told me. passed it along. Zeke told you because you asked. I didn't argue the point. True. Mondo Tatsumi stood there for a moment, with the specific stillness of a person who is very good at thinking, and is currently doing it. Team was designed for 5, he said finally. I know. 5 is structurally correct for the system I built. I know. An unauthorized 6th variable creates instability in the combat protocol matrix. I know, I said. I'm not asking to be part of the matrix. He looked at me for a long beat. You asking? I'm not asking for anything, I said. I've never asked for anything. I just keep showing up. Another pause. Longer. Crystal's record contains Zeke's analysis of each team member's combat performance, Mondo said. Naguère pulled it when he was working through the coordinates. Zeke filed assessments on all 5 of them. He also filed one on you. I hadn't known that. He assessed you as, and I'm reading this directly. Mondo pulled a small print out from his coat pocket, because he was a man who wrote things down, and printed them out, even when they were 2 sentences. The most tactically, situationally aware combatant in the engagement compensates for a lack of weapons training with an extensive and detailed observational model of the team's operational patterns, would be an asset in any configuration that could accommodate her. I didn't say anything. He wrote that before the transfer, Mondo said, before the armor, based only on watching you work. He wrote it because I reminded him of someone he'd lost, I said. Haps, Mondo said. People's assessments are always colored by their history. That doesn't make the assessment wrong. He folded the printout and put it back in his coat pocket. The system was designed for 5, he said again. But systems can be updated. The structural question is whether the update introduces more stability than instability. He paused. I need to run the numbers. He left. That was his way. A statement that was not quite a decision but was the precursor to one. And then the departure that meant he was going to go do the thinking that the decision required. Zeke had been quiet during the exchange. After Mondo left, he said, that is a man who makes decisions by calculation. Yes. And you wait for the calculation. I've been waiting for 6 months, I said. Lilia would not have waited, he said. No, I agreed. But I'm not Lilia. I thought about it. I think the waiting might be the specifically human part. We know how to do it. We can hold a position indefinitely without a resolution. As long as we believe the resolution is possible, we just keep showing up. He was quiet for a moment. Is that what you believe? That the resolution is possible? Yes, I said. Otherwise I would have stopped 6 months ago. He said nothing, but he settled back against the recovery station with the particular quality of someone who has heard a thing they needed to hear. And I understood that this was also his version of it, that he had needed to see the thing Golomoyas had taken from him, which was the end of the work, the completion of the pursuit, the wall holding so that something on the other side kept living. He'd needed to see it happen, and he'd seen it. Rest, I said, he did. I walked out of the ship and into the night city, where the cleanup crews were still working the eastern ward, under portable floodlights. And the emergency vehicles were parked in their careful rows. And somewhere out there the 5 siblings drew after-action reports, and would be going home to whatever home looked like for people who had been built into a team by their father. Crystal was in my vest pocket, not glowing, just warm the way a stone is warm after a long day in the sun. Took it out and looked at it. The power it had given me was gone. The armor was gone. What remained was the record. Every hunter, every fight, every decision, made by people who had decided that the work of protecting things mattered more than whether anyone acknowledged that they were doing it. A lineage. Not mine, but not close to me either. Zeke had said it would not stay with me indefinitely. He had not said it would leave me entirely. I put it back in my pocket and walked toward the floodlights, where there was work to do, and I knew how to do some of it, and I kept walking. That is the thing they don't tell you about showing up when nobody asked you to. The first time is the hardest. After that, it is simply a habit. And habits, if you hold them long enough, become a kind of identity. I was a shuttle pilot. I am a shuttle pilot. I was also, for the duration of one fight in one intersection on one morning, when 2 alien factions converged on a city that didn't deserve it. The last thing standing between the end of a lineage and its disappearance into the dark. The lineage didn't disappear. That's enough. I thought about that a lot in the weeks that followed. Zeke recovered slowly. He was not the kind of person who made recovery look easy, or who pretended that it was. He was also not the kind of person who made it look dramatic. He simply did it. The same way he'd done everything else, with the patient, deliberate attention of someone who has made a decision and is executing it one step at a time. When he was well enough to sit up, he asked Nagar for a copy of the city's emergency response protocols. He read them the same day. 3 days later, he asked for the team's after-action reports from the last 6 months. "Studying us," Matoy said, when he noticed. "I am studying what you protect," Zeke said, "and how." He paused. Juuma, hunter lineage, was built on the premise that protection has to be learned, that it is not instinct, not for any species. Instinct tells you to protect your immediate group. You do is larger than that. It requires discipline and methodology. Matoy considered this. Father built the methodology. Your father built tools, Zeke said. The 5 of you built the methodology. Tools don't save cities. The intention behind them does. Matoy looked at him for a moment, in the way Matoy looked at things that had reorganized his understanding of something. Then he nodded once and walked away, which is how Matoy accepted a point he found valid. Shu stayed longer. Shu always stayed longer. He and Zeke talked for an hour that afternoon, about the Juuma hunter structure, about how they'd operated, about Lilia's command style. I listened from the doorway and learned things I hadn't known to ask about. I was in the doorway rather than the room because I still navigated the line carefully. Old habit. The 14th day, Mondo Tatsumi came back. He came in the way he'd come the first time, unannounced in the middle of something else, with the quality of a man who treats interruption as a precision instrument. He carried with him a single folder and a small equipment case I didn't recognize. He set both down on the table in the ship's common area, where I happened to be reviewing contingency plans for the Dark Sword site with Nagare, who had made the review into a weekly recurring item on his calendar. "The numbers are done," Mondo said. Nagare and I looked at each other. He stood and left without being asked, because Nagare understood when information management was the appropriate response. Mondo sat down. "The team was designed for 5, he said again. Shh. He said it as though establishing a foundations that everything else would be built on. The structural basis for 5 was that the rescue system has 5 primary response disciplines: fire, water, rescue, medical, 1 for each. It is a complete system." "Yes," I said. "A 6th discipline would be redundant unless it addressed a gap." "I understand." "The gap," he said, "that I did not design for because I did not anticipate it is field intelligence. Tactical observation at the level of engagement. My children are exceptional combatants, and they are trained to think in the fight. What they are not trained to do is observe the fight from outside while they are inside it. That requires a different cognitive position." He opened the folder. Zeke's assessment, which I read 8 times, describes someone who has spent 6 months in exactly that cognitive position, not by design. By circum nothing. The equipment case, Mondo said, contains a communications module that integrates with the team's tactical channel at a level of access you currently do not have. You would be able to transmit to all 5 simultaneously, to receive all their telemetry data in real time, and to issue observed tactical assessments during engagement. He paused. "You would not be Go-6. There is no Go-6. You would be a designated tactical observer and communications asset. It is not the same." "I know it's not the same," I said. "It is also not nothing," he said. I looked at the equipment case for a moment, at the folder. Mondo Tatsumi, who had built a rescue system for 5 children, and had now done the calculation that determined a 6th variable added stability rather than instability, and had come here to tell me so in the most technical terms available to him. "I have 2 conditions," I said. He raised an eyebrow. It was the only visible expression of surprise he permitted himself. "First, frequency and encryption key stay the same as what I've memorized. I don't want to have to relearn them." A pause. "That is a security issue. I've had the frequency and key for 6 months, and I've never done anything with them except show up when you needed another set of eyes. I'd like to argue the security risk is already assessed." He held the pause for a beat. "The second condition. I want access to all the after-action reports going back to the beginning. Everything filed since the team formed. I've been working from partial information and I want the full picture. Another pause. Longer. Those reports contain sensitive tactical information about team's methods. I know, I said. I'd like to know it properly instead of inferring it from radio traffic. He looked at me across the table for a long time. Not the calculating look, something else. The look of someone who is seeing a person specifically rather than a variable in a system. Your conditions are accepted, he said. He pushed the equipment case across the table. I opened it. The module was compact, well-engineered. Mondo's design philosophy applied to hardware, which was the same as his design philosophy applied to everything. Nothing included that didn't need to be there. Everything that did need to be there precisely where it belonged. Took it out and held it. There is one thing I want to say, Mondo said. He said it with the particular care of a person who has prepared a statement and is now delivering it. What you did in the intersection, carrying the crystal, using what you had, holding the line until the team could use the information you gave them, that was not luck, and it was not coincidence. I do not attribute outcomes to those factors when a more accurate explanation is available. He paused. The more accurate explanation is that you are very good at the thing you have been doing for 6 months, and that the thing you have been doing months is what this team needed. He stood up. Welcome to the team, he said, in the capacity described. He left. I sat with the module in my hands for a while. Through the ship's viewport, I could see the city. The eastern ward still showing the marks of the fight. The cleanup crews making it look more like itself again. The lights coming on as evening arrived. Somewhere in the city, 5 siblings were finishing their shifts, or eating dinner, or doing the 100 ordinary things that people do when the extraordinary thing has passed. I thought about what Zeke had said, about Lelia, about walls. A wall doesn't know what's on the other side. It just holds. I'd been holding for 6 months from the outside. Now I was on the line. Crystal in my vest pocket was warm. But the communications module in my bag, shouldered the bag, and walked out of the ship and into the evening. There was a team briefing at Aero 700 tomorrow. I had access to the calendar now, the same access they all had, and I intended to be early. Early enough to have the room set up before anyone arrived. Early enough to have reviewed the last 6 months of after-action reports and flagged the patterns I'd already noticed, and a few I suspected but hadn't been able to confirm. Enough that when Matoy walked in and saw me at the terminal, it would be obvious that I'd been there a while, and he would do the calculation he always did, and the calculation would arrive at the same answer it always arrived at when I was in a room. She belongs here. He'd never said it. He didn't need to. Some things don't require words. They just require showing up long enough and being present to the work, and trusting that the work itself will eventually make the argument better than you can. I showed up. That was always enough. The briefing at 0700 was the first one I attended as something other than a ghost. I had been in that room before, or rather, I had been in rooms adjacent to it. On the other side of the facility's main door, listening through a wireless relay I'd set up in the hallway 6 weeks into my unofficial assignment. The relay was the kind of technical improvisation that would have gotten me a formal reprimand in any legitimate military structure, and probably a commendation in a less formal one. I'd never asked anyone's permission to run it. I'd never told anyone it existed. I'd simply decided that if I was going to be useful, I needed to hear the briefings, and if hearing the briefings required me to build the capability myself, then I would build it. I was at the terminal at 0630. The room had a coffee system that Matsuri had installed 3 months ago. She'd decided the cognitive of performance improved measurably after a standardized pre-briefing caffeine delivery, which was accurate and also a characteristically Matsuri way of saying she wanted good coffee available and had the data to justify it. I made a full pot and arranged the cups and had the overnight incident data pulled and formatted on the main display before the first sibling arrived. Matsuri came in at 0655 and saw me at the terminal, and stopped in the doorway for exactly the amount of time it takes a person to process something unexpected and arrive at a response. Response was to walk to the coffee system, pour a cup, and take the seat 2 positions down from me without comment. which I understood as the specific form of acceptance that Matsuri offered. Not statement but presence, not approval but accommodation. Daimon arrived next and said, out loud and without preamble, I knew you'd be early. You didn't know, I said. Suspected, he said, which was his version of the same thing. Nagare came in at 0658 and sat down and opened his tablet and started reading, which was what Nagare did instead of saying good morning. Shu arrived at 0700 exactly. He saw me, and the look he gave me was one I'd seen on his face in a photograph I'd found in the program's shared archive. A photo from before all of this, from the academy days, of a younger version of him looking at something with the particular quality of someone seeing a thing they'd expected to happen eventually, happening. Relief that was too quiet to be called relief. Recognition that was too practiced to be called surprise. He sat down next to me. Matoy came in at 0702, which was late for Matoy, which meant he'd been dealing with something on the way in. He assessed the room in his standard sweep, the kind of fast full scan that combat training and years of operational experience had made automatic, and landed on me at the terminal, and paused for 1 second before continuing to his position at the head of the table. Morning, Kyoko, he said. Good morning, Go Red, I said. A beat. He looked at me with the particular expression he used when he was deciding whether to address something directly or defer it. He decided to defer it, which was correct. There was an agenda and a start time, and the team's operational posture didn't benefit from handling interpersonal transitions in the briefing slot. Overnight incidents, he said. 2, I said. Minor SIMA distortion signatures in the Northern District, both resolved without contact. The second one looks like a probe pattern rather than a setup for engagement. They were testing response time, not staging. I pulled the data to the main display. Nagare. I flagged the probe because the timing matches a pattern from the pre-Golomois period. When the SEMA were doing perimeter mapping, I want to run the comparison against the full incident log. Nagare looked up from his tablet. I pulled the same flag at 0548 this morning. I know. I saw it in the shared log. I'm confirming we're looking at the same thing. He nodded once. That was Nagare, for we're aligned. Matoy looked at us both. The deliberate quality of his expression when he was taking something in was recognizable to me now. I'd watched it across 6 months of engagement footage and real-time radio. He was updating his model of the room. Run the comparison, he said. Full team reads the results before end of day. If the SIMA are mapping again, that means they're planning something, and we want the lead time. Understood, Nagare and I said. At the same time, brief silence, then Daimon made a sound that was not quite a laugh. What? Matoy said. Nothing, Daimon said. Just noting that took about 40 seconds. What did? For it to feel normal, Daimon said. Matoy looked at his youngest brother for a moment, with the expression of a man who is deciding whether this requires a response. He decided it did not. He moved to the next item on the agenda, and I pulled the relevant data to the display, and the briefing continued. I had been watching for 6 months from the outside, learning the rhythms of 5 people who had been building something together since before any of this started. I had learned what Matoy needed to hear and when. I had learned when Nagara was working through something that looked like silence, but was actually intensive processing. I had learned that Sho's dry deflections were how he managed the tension between caring too much and not wanting to show it. I had learned that Matsuri's precision was not coldness, but its opposite. That the discipline was what she used to keep herself operational when the emotional weight of the work would otherwise be too heavy. I had learned that Daimon, who seemed the most straightforward of all of them, was the one watching the others most carefully, holding the space for the moments when the others couldn't. I had learned all of this from the outside. Now, I was in the room, and the room felt exactly the way the radio had always suggested it would. Purposeful and human, and structured around something that was not just mission, but relationship. After the briefing, Zeke calmed in from the ship. He was not recovered enough for field work. Probably another 3 weeks, by Matsuri's assessment, and Matsuri's medical assessments were precise. He was recovered enough for analysis, and he had apparently decided that analysis was what he would contribute until the field work was possible. He had sent an overnight report on the Juuma clan's known behavioral patterns, and how they mapped onto what the Saima had been doing, which was a document Nagare had read in full at a 600 and had marked with 17 annotations. "He's going to be useful," Nagara said, when the others had filtered out after the briefing. "He was already useful," I said. "More than I expected," Nagaro said, which for Nagara was high praise. I thought about what Zeke had said about walls, about protection as a learned discipline, about the distance between the thing you protect and the work you do to protect it, and the way that distance is the price of the work. I thought about 6 months of that distance, about the relay in the hallway, and the borrowed vests, and the unauthorized vehicles, and the edge of every perimeter I'd ever stood at, close enough to help, and far enough back to maintain deniability. I thought about the intersection and the gold and the crystal's warmth, and Zeke's voice when he said her name. Some of it stays with you. That's the thing nobody tells you about borrowed power. Even when it leaves a mark. Not the capability, not the armor, just the knowledge of what it felt like to be fully committed to a thing, to have every resource you had pointed at one problem, with no part of yourself held in reserve. Pete, the crystal had done that to me for 20 minutes. The memory of it was a kind of benchmark now, a reference point I carried. I had never been that committed to anything before, in exactly that way. I had been dedicated to things, had been professional about things, had worked hard and shown up and done what was asked and more. The crystal had shown me what it felt like when there was no gap between what you were capable of and what you were doing, when every part of you was in the same place at the same time, pointed at the same thing. I wanted to feel that again, not through the crystal. Crystal would stay where it was, warm and quiet in my vest pocket, a record of something rather than a power source. I wanted to find that feeling through the work itself, through the briefings and the data, and the tactical observations and the moments in the field when I could see an angle that the others couldn't see from inside the fight. I thought I could get there. I thought this team was the place to do it. Xiao found me in the corridor outside the data room an hour later. He had the look he got when he wanted to say something, and was still working out how to say it. "You're going to be great at this," he said finally. "I know," I said. He blinked. "That was faster than I expected." "I've been waiting to be allowed to do this for 6 months," I said. "I'm past the part where I need reassurance." He laughed. It was a real laugh. Surprised, warm, the one that got past his practice deflection. "Fair enough. Thank you for talking Matoy down," I said. "Every time. All 6 months." "He wasn't wrong," Xiao said. "The system was designed for 5. I know, he was also not entirely right." "No," Xiao said. "He wasn't." He paused. "He knows that now. I know he does." Shoes looked at me with the look from the photograph again, recognition and relief, and something that was specifically his own version of welcome, which did not announce itself but was present if you knew where to look. "Early next time too," he said. "Earlier," I said. He nodded and walked away, and I went back to the data room, and the comparison analysis, and the city continued to exist outside the window, and somewhere to the east, the cleanup crews were finishing the last of their work, and the teams that protected things were doing what they did. Quietly and without ceremony. Because the ceremony was not the point. Point was the wall. The point was showing up. The point was that I had been in that intersection, and I had held, and the thing on the other side of the wall was still there. That was enough. It was always enough.